Hello viewers, this is your host Dhiren Mehta from the Global Perspectives. Last week we had a program where we covered India-China conflict with focus on recent event that happened in Galwan Valley. But we also talked about other aspects in terms of the diplomacy, in terms of the foreign relationship. In this program, we are going to go deeper, specifically focused on the military aspect, and we'll talk about how is the military balance between India and China, and what are the various scenarios that can evolve, and what we should do as a country, from a military standpoint. And to discuss that, we have a very illustrious panel. We have Akshay Ji, who is a defense analyst with over 20 plus years focus on defense. We have Air Commodore Ashit Mehta. Mr. Mehta, Air Commodore Mehta, has extensive career in military. He commissioned as a fighter pilot in 1981 and served as a commanding officer of a squadron. He led MiG-23 squadron during Kargil War, wherein 30% of the offensive in the war was led by his squadron. And he bagged also 6 gallantry awards. He has masters in the defense studies from the King's College London, and he has led successfully indigenous projects for MiG-27 upgrades and AWACS upgrades. So he is very well aware about the mechanics of the fighter plane as well as AWACS, etc. He took premature retirement in 2012, and since then he is leading business development for a multinational defense aerospace company. We also have Dr. Shiv, who is a retired surgeon, but with 50 plus years of long interest in the military aviation. He has done a deep research in the area. He is very conversant with the terrain, with the China in terms of how it is built up, what are China's equipments and how they are kind of gang up against. He maintains a video blog with India-centered military aviation and on a YouTube channel, Cyber Surge. He's also an author of a book titled Pakistan Failed State. So welcome to the panel and glad to have you. We start our program with opening comments by each of the panelists, and we'll go in alphabetical order. So Akshay Ji, going over to you.
In the last panel discussion, I was very surprised to hear some panelists saying that the Western media has been saying that India was hit badly in Galwan, number one, and number two, that India is much weaker than China. That is simply not correct. And I would like to bring out in this discussion that the balance of military power is slightly in favor of India versus China, in the air and in naval forces. One of the large reasons for this is geography. Due to the Himalayas, we have significant advantages in terms of both ground forces and in air. And also, if you look at the Western sector vis-a-vis Pakistan, Pakistan is a country that has narrow depth. That is why the Pakistanis always keep talking about strategic depth. And the Indus River runs north to south, bisecting Pakistan, and it has got 5 tributaries, the 5 rivers of Punjab, that move east to west. And using all of this, India has significant geographical advantages. And I strongly believe that if the military is allowed to execute unrestricted warfare that is sensible in tactical terms and operational terms, we definitely have an edge. And I will try in this panel to bring out the specifics of this edge out.
Thank you so much. Air Commodore Ashit Mehta, would you like to go ahead?
Firstly, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to join this panel with the kind of knowledge and depth that Dr. Shiv and Akshay have. I certainly like to fill in the gaps where the air power part of the discussion is involved. As a background, I'm exposed to a certain amount of flying in that area for many years over the Himalayas and up to Leh and beyond, and a little bit on the Siachen Glacier. And I look forward to kind of a involved and active participation and try and give my back my bit of the knowledge that I have on the subject. Lots is going to be covered in this 1 hour, so I think we'll move to the next phase where we start looking at specific points of discussion.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Shiv, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I have, as Dhiren ji said, I've been interested in military aviation for 50 years. And I've done a detailed open source satellite image study, mainly using Google Earth, of all roads and all the terrain in the India-China border. So suddenly when this crisis started 3 or 4 months ago, I found myself in a very unique position in having insights into the terrain, the problems that China faces, both in terms of terrain and in terms of military aviation. And I would be happy to fill in details wherever necessary in these areas.
Thank you so much. So let's get into the program. So Akshay ji, in the last program, you gave a detailed view of how the clashes happened on the night of 15-16 June in Galwan Valley. Can you tell our viewer what is the situation on the ground now? And specifically what's happening in the Galwan and Pangong Tso. And also if you can talk about how is the Chinese military buildup in that area.
Sure. So basically what happened was that China was exercising with its with about 3 mechanized divisions in Xinjiang and in Tibet Autonomous Region. They do these summer exercises usually. Usually they do it at brigade level strength, or maybe 2 brigades. This time they were doing with almost 3 divisions, which is a significant increase. So 3 divisions make 3 brigades make a division, so significant increase. And what really happened was that towards the end of these exercises, around in early May, the 6th Mechanized Division broke off, separated it into its constituent brigades, and made a mad dash down. One of those brigades went into an area called Samsung Ling, which is above the Galwan Valley. And the idea was that they would try to catch India unawares and roll down. So Dr. Shiv has very kindly prepared some maps, which I'm going to use very quickly to show you. So I think when we look at maps, we'll be able to understand what's happening on ground, and also very important to see where their buildup is now and what we should do to counter in terms of taking the heights. So I just want to point that out because that is going to be very, very important on ground. So as you can see, this is a map of the Galwan Valley. The blue line here is the Galwan River. It's about 80 kilometers in length. It starts from a place called Samsung Ling, where, as I said, one of the constituent armored brigades of the division of the 6th Mechanized Division came. It's a narrow valley, and it goes like this, and then it takes a sharp left turn, and then it goes down for about 5 kilometers or so, and it meets the Shiok River here. As Ekamoto Mehta sir is familiar with the area, he would know that the Shiok then goes north and comes almost close to DBO. The LAC is the red line here, and it basically runs about 5 kilometers upstream from the Galwan River. So basically what happened that in that area on the night of 15-16 January was that the Chinese thought that they would roll back, and they carried out an ambush of our party of 16 Bihar. And one very important point to make out, it was actually Xi Jinping's birthday on the 15th June.
Okay.
And we are told that the Western Theater commander, China's Western Theater takes care of all aspects vis-a-vis India, also vis-a-vis Russia. So the Western Theater commander, who's Zhang Zhao, he probably orchestrated this ambush to basically present Indian heads to Xi Jinping, but thanks to the bravery of 16 Bihar, the Ghatak platoon of Free Punjab, elements of 3 Medium Regiment, 180 Field Regiment, they were smashed, and we inflicted very severe casualties on them, and they were very, very surprised, and they are in a big trouble now. But this is basically the area. And what is happening now in this area is that the Chinese have moved back. we are reasonably sure they've moved back. We see certain satellite pictures of certain tentage in some of these areas. So some of the so-called experts are saying that Chinese are significantly strengthening these areas through this. But basically, it is not tactically sound to have tentage or defenses in a valley, in a mountain river valley. So these are not really defenses. These are just some tentage there to basically help them widen the valley or so on and so forth. So that is what is happening in Galwan. They have been pushed back. Now there is.
So are you saying that they're widening the valley to be able to kind of increase their?
Yeah. So very interesting question. Basically, what happened was that somewhere around this area, if you see my cursor, somewhere around this area, there was I wouldn't call it a dam, but some kind of an obstacle was created by China. And satellite imagery showed us that south of that, so downstream of that, and that was somewhere around this area. Downstream of that, it was completely dry. And even weather, moisture, weather satellites that can detect moisture were not able to detect any moisture downstream. But on the 18th and onwards, pictures were taken again, and the river was in full flow. So one thing that our troops did that night, they jumped into these icy waters at 16,000 feet and minus 20 degrees, and they broke these dams or this structure with their hand. And I think that was a very, very important strategic point, because India is a lower riparian state compared to China, and we had to set a precedent that you cannot basically block our riparian rights. So that is what has happened. Before I move on to the next map, I just want to make one point. If you see these, if you follow my cursor, you see that here and here. So basically on the two flanks of the Galwan River, there are heights. It is very important in my view to establish positions and defenses on these heights. One here, one here, one here, one here, one here. So these heights must be secured by us, and we must definitely have positions on this. And in military terms, this is called dominance by observation. So you dominate an area in two ways: dominance by observation and domination by fire. This would be domination by observation, and obviously behind this there are artillery units stationed, which will then fire based on the inputs that they get from here. So it's very important to dominate that. I think I wanted to make that one point. The other thing is, so this is the fingers area. You can see that again. Thanks so much to Dr. Shiv, who's made these maps. Now, geographically, if you look at the terrain, Daulat Beg Oldie is right at the top, closest to north. As you go lower, in the middle, roughly is where we looked at earlier, the Galwan area, and a little lower is the Pengong Tso, and if you go even lower, you find Demchok. Now, this is the Pengong Tso Lake, and what you see here is what is called the Spanger Lake.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Four Fingers area. Enough has been said about it. I will only say that this red line on finger 4 is the Chinese perception of the line of control, and this red line on finger 8, Srijap area, is our perception of the line of control.
Got it.
This area was disputed is not a right word, because we actually lay claim to it, but this area was patrolled by both parties, and now the Chinese have set up some, again, I would not use the word defenses, because defenses mean that you dig trenches, you build certain structures on which you can put gun emplacements and so on and so forth, but they have certainly laid down some tentage, some infrastructure here. So it is not possible for us to now move from finger 4 area, go behind here and go here. So that is what they have done. We are also sure that they have taken position on these heights. So they have taken positions here, here, here. They have taken positions on these heights. So this area is going to be a little tricky to handle. In the finger 4 area, there is a problem, as everybody knows, and they've also taken defenses on the heights of finger 4. And the other area that is a bit of a concern is the Depsang Plains, that is opposite Askaichen. and we are getting reports that they have done a little bit of build-up in the Askai Chin area as well. So that is the current situation on ground. Our forces. Sorry, and another thing that has happened is that to reinforce the 6th Mechanized Division, we are hearing that the 4th Motorized / Mechanized Division has also moved there. So now they have elements of 2 divisions against us. What we have done is we typically have 3 Mountain Div there, which is the Trishul Division with 5 brigades. 1 brigade is for Siachen, the other 4 brigades are for here. We've reinforced it with another division. I think it is 39 Div. And we had an independent armored brigade. We have put in another independent armored brigade. So we have at least 6 tank regiments there, probably more. So our strength is quite significant in that area. And for the Chinese to be able to do anything, they will have to get a superiority of at least 3:1 in the plains area. So there are 2-3 areas there which are the plains areas. They will have to get superiority of at least 3:1 there. And in the hilly areas, some of them which I showed you, they will have to get significantly higher superiority. But right now our forces are evenly matched, so Chinese have no chance.
Got it. Thanks for that. And follow-up question to that, and maybe you covered a bit of that, but maybe you can expand, is what's been India's response, in terms of the deployment of the forces, and how is India's ground forces vis China?
Right. So let me tell you what our total ground forces vis-a-vis China are. Our Northern Command handles China and handles Pakistan. 14 Corps within Northern Command handles Eastern Ladakh, and they have 2 divisions now, the 3rd Div and I think the 39 Div. There is another division which is taking care of what is called the sugar sector, which is the central Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand area. And then as you go east, that is the entire Arunachal Pradesh, we have a total of 9 divisions there. Each division is 15,000 men roughly. So say we have 135,000 men there. Plus you have the Mountain Strike Corps, which has 2 divisions, one in Pangad and one based at Pathankot. So against China, we have in Eastern Command 9 divs plus 2 of the Strike Corps. So that is 11 divisions. That is roughly 165,000 troops. And and there will be additional elements of independent armored brigades, independent artillery brigades, and all of that. And in the Eastern Ladakh area, we have roughly 2 divisions for sure. So that's 30,000 men, plus at least 2 independent armored brigades. So in total against China, we have 225,000 troops, just dedicated for China.
Just dedicated for China.
Just dedicated for China. We have not moved these troops from the Western sector. In the Western sector, we have 24 divisions dedicated for the Western sector. And the entire Pakistani army is 23 divisions. Okay, so the entire army is 23 divisions. We've got about 24 divisions dedicated for that sector. And we get into land forces there, and we have more than enough troops in the north.
And there is reserve capacity.
I beg your pardon?
And there is a lot of reserve capacity, I believe.
No, this is total. this includes our reserves and everything. Okay. There is so of this 24 divisions that we have, when you tactically deploy, there would be some reserve, some would be front. In total, we have 24 divisions against China. Against Pakistan, and against China we have 9 plus 2, 11 plus 3 plus 2, 13 plus 1, at least 14 divisions against China.
Got it.
Okay. And China right now has only 2 divisions against us in Ladakh. The 6th and the 4th. So 6th came in first and the 4th is reinforced. No, that is significant. They never used to have anybody there. Okay. So they've got, so this is an important point. They've got mechanized troops there. Now people do not get in mechanized troops in such strength in an area without some intentions. Intentions are absolutely clear. Intentions are to take Indian territory. And because of my technological backwardness, I'm not able to show you those fantastic maps that Dr. Shiv had made. But there are several areas where they are trying to get in. And some of the important areas are, one is in the Depsang Plateau, so just around Askai Chin. One is that area. Then if you come lower, the Chushul area, which is the area between the two lakes, Pengongsao Lake on the top and Spangle Lake on the south. Between that, there is some area. And if you come south, there is Demchok. Now, from Demchok to Nangari, actually, let me see if I can show that map to you. That would be a very interesting map. So this just shows where we can attack them. It is quite important to show where we can attack them. So Demchok is the southern end of our LAC with them in Eastern Ladakh. And Demchok is very close to the LAC, just a few kilometers from here, from there. But from Demchok, there is a road that runs southwards. Then it is a Chinese-built road, and then it comes into the Indus River bed, and that runs straight onto the Nangari airfield, which is an important airfield of China. And we can mount an armored thrust through that. I just want to make that point. Is the picture there? So, Sir must be, Air Commodore Mehta must be very familiar with this. So I think the advanced landing ground is here somewhere. I can't see it from here. But what you see, the blue lines are basically Chinese lines, roads that are made very close to the line of control. That is their standard tactics. And they are building up somewhere in this area. The 4th Mechanized Division is definitely here somewhere in this area. I can't show you exactly where here. One important thing to note here is the Karakoram Pass. As you can see, the Karakoram Pass is here. So this is the, and if you go just a little bit to the northeast of this, comes the Siachen Glacier.
Got it.
So this area is extremely important because you have Siachen that acts as a wedge between China on one side and Pakistan on the other side. And it is our appreciation, I'm sure everybody's appreciation, that they are trying to put pressure here. And they can certainly try a pincer movement by building up here, as well as to the north of this. Conversely, what we can do and what we should do is to be able to put pressure down here. There are many areas where we can put pressure here. So there are 3 areas where we can put pressure against them in Eastern Ladakh. One is here. The other is the area between the 2 lakes, between the Pengongsao Lake and the Spangle Lake. That is the Chushul area and the Demchok area, that, as I showed you earlier. But I think I'll keep quiet now. Basically, on land forces, we have more than enough to take care of China, including mounting an offensive against them. And there is absolutely nothing they can do to us in that area.
Got it. Thanks a lot, Akshay ji. Very detailed view of the current situation as well as China's, what are their positions, etc.
Yeah.
And why is India as well. So, Dr. Shiv, you have done a detailed study of the area, and that's your passion. You have done so much of detailed study. Can you please tell our viewers, from the Air Force standpoint, what is China's strength and how is it stacked up?
Yeah, see, the thing is, right? I was a little boy in that. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
See, I was a little boy in 1962, and I remember those years. A great fear has been created about China, and when the word China is mentioned, Indians tend to start, trembling with fear. And it's not only the average Indian. You see that among politicians, diplomats, speaking in a tone of fear. Yeah, we must fear an adversary, a powerful adversary. And they say China has 3,000 aircraft, of which there are 1,500 military aircraft. Now, the total number of fighter aircraft we have is less than 700 right now. So then, we have this mental image created of 1,500 Chinese aircraft coming in, attacking us, and wiping out the Indian Air Force. This is the feeling that the average thing has. Fine. If I may point out, all aircraft, we've all flown, they need airfields.
Yeah.
Now, where are these airfields? Tibet has got 4 airfields against India, and Xinjiang has got 3. So there are a total of 7 airfields, and I've had a very close look at them. And of this, now, Nagari is an airfield which we can actually capture, as Akshay ji said. That airfield is situated at 4,500 meters. 4,500 meters is so high that most Chinese aircraft can't take off, and those that can take off from there are not going to be heavily loaded. and it's so close to the border. The first thing India would be doing if hostilities start would be to close that airfield down. So we rule out Angari. There's another airfield in Tibet called Ningchi that's very close to Arunachal Pradesh. It's in fact 10 kilometers north of the Arunachal Pradesh border.
Okay.
This can be shelled by artillery. Rule out that airfield. If you count the other airfields, the maximum number of aircraft. Okay, the other thing is normally, if you look at Pakistani airfields, for instance, you know they've got pens, they've got protection. You can attack the airfield, and you may not get the fighters on the ground. You may put a hole in the tarmac. They may repair it overnight. The planes are protected. Neither in Xinjiang nor in Tibet are any of the airfields protected. They just open aprons. Planes are parked in the open, and you can actually see oil marks on the ground where planes are parked. And if you count the marks, you count how many marks are there. The Chinese are not going to be able to put more than 150, 160 aircraft in all these airfields. That's about 2 in Tibet and 2 in Xinjiang. So they're not really going to be able to attack us with 1,500, and they have an altitude problem. There is no place in Tibet that is less than 4,500 meters above the ground. Planes really cannot take off with a full load. And you see, the other thing is, planes have to come back home. They take off. So they have to take off with a lot of fuel. If they take off with a lot of fuel, the number of weapons is reduced. So really, the only realistic place where planes can, probably attack full loaded is from Xinjiang. Xinjiang airports are also higher than Bangalore. Bangalore itself is 1,000 meters, 900 meters above sea level. Xinjiang airports are 1,200, 1,300 meters above sea level. So those planes are not going to have a full load, but they'll be all right there. Su-27 copies and J-10s can take off from there. So 1,500 aircraft are not going to be coming at us. No, maybe 150 at a time. And I'm sure the Indian Air Force can handle that.
Okay. So when you say Indian Air Force can handle that, so coming to Air Commodore Ashit Mehta, can you tell us what is Indian Air Force strength-wise, and how does it compare against Chinese Air Force strength?
Right. That's an interesting question. As Dr. Shiv just brought out, whilst Chinese have the superiority in numbers, in quantity, there is a thing about quality and deployment. It's a combination which matters. And he actually highlighted a very significant fact that when you want to use a platform like a fighter, it is important that how are you going to use it? What is its capacity in terms of weapon carrying capacity, its range of operations, and its delivery technique? What kind of weapons it has? What does it have for its self-defense? Its survivability, its roles, whether it's going to do ground attack, whether it's going to do interception. In many ways, every fighter has a specific task for a particular mission. So a multi-role aircraft can do ground attack as well as intercept to safeguard, from the attacking airplanes. So just as brought out, the People's Liberation Army Air Forces, PLAF as they call it in China, Chinese Air Force, it has close to 1,700 fighter class of aircraft. Ours are less than 700. The numbers have been dwindling, as we are all aware. We are going through a kind of a bottoming of our number of fighter squadrons in the last few years, with the MiG-21s and MiG-27s going on. Only a few Bison squadrons are there. Otherwise, we are left with the Sukhoi 30s, the Mirage 2000, Jaguars, MiG-29s, Bisons, and the LCA. Overall, less than 700 airplanes against a desire of close to 1,000. In numbers, definitely China is far more than nearly double and little more. But again, as I highlighted earlier, it's the usage of the platform. So when you compare airplanes, when you compare number of planes, when you compare your potential, it is what you can do with those weapons, what you can do with that platform is important.
Yeah.
In that, we are reasonably well matched. In some cases, even superior, because if you look at our experience, we've fought a number of wars with Pakistan. All of them, we've successfully defeated them. China has the only experience of having engaged with Vietnam sometime in 69 or sometime in 70s. Yes, our pilots regularly participate in exercises along with Americans. We do with UK, we do with Australia, we do with France. There's a fair amount of exposure that we have received. So what happens is you bring a quality which, when used, it will exploit the best possible capacity or the potential of the aeroplane and put it to use, which is a very important aspect. So in terms of balancing and comparing the two assets, certainly numbers and quality, these two are two different factors. And I would say, based on the location, deployment, like Dr. Shiv brought out very correctly, they are deployed very far, deep, and at very high elevation. When you are at higher elevation, the thrust reduces because the density is lower. So the amount of weapons that the aircraft can carry is limited. And if it carries weapons, it cannot carry enough fuel. It is, if you have an all-off weight of say 10 tons, it could carry say 4 tons of fuel and maybe a couple of tons of bomb. But if it carries 2 tons of bombs, or if it carries more bombs, then it can't carry fuel. So it's a combination. So what you want? You want range, you want more weapons. It's a big dilemma for a user with such kind of critical elevation. So to my mind, we're equally well balanced at the moment. Don't bother about numbers. We are well settled in our locations in the border, which are completely around the LAC, maybe a little deeper, 100 and 150 kilometers, which is well within our range. We have head-to-head refuelers, so we can, after having taken off and flown about 100 kilometers, we can refuel and now have the full potential of going deeper, and thereafter coming back with whatever missions that we need to carry out. So just purely in deployment and assets, it's not a question of any doubt in our minds that we are outbalanced. We're pretty good.
Thank you so much. And I think you bring up a good point about, not just look at the number, because that can be deceptive. Statistics is always deceptive. But the actual, delivery capability or the qualitative aspect in terms of what is its capability to really be a challenge. So Dr. Shiv, can you tell our viewers, right, we talked about Ladakh region, but what if China were to come from Sikkim or Siliguri or Walong, from the eastern segment? What would be the scenario in that case?
Yeah, there are 5 or 6 points of confrontation. If you start from the far east, you have what is called the Siang River Valley right in the east. Now the Siang River Valley it's densely forested on their side and our side. And if you're talking about military action, we are not actually going to get any mechanized forces from them in that area. And they have, and the other thing is, most people look at a map. Now, who looks, you have to be obsessed to be like me, and excuse me, to look at the satellite images. Most people look at a map and see the main highway in China, and they say, oh, it's only so close to the border. So the Chinese have got a highway close to the border. Actually, the highway is 50 to 200 kilometers away.
Oh, is it?
From the border. Yeah, exactly. And when you look at the Far East, what I said with the Siang River, the nearest highway point is 150 kilometers away through terrible mountainous terrain. Mm-hmm. So they have a very long logistics. And if you want to go to the main centers like Shigatse, we are talking about a 350 kilometer, 400 kilometer ride for them. So that's an area that's not very likely. Then we come to the more central areas. Then there's the area where near Tawang, where the Siliguri corridor comes. Now this is an area where they are very strong. Here also their main roads are long. They're about 120, 130 from the highway and about 400 from the main towns. This is an area where we can hold. This is an area where they are at the edge of the plateau, and Tawang is on the downslope. So there's a terrain disadvantage for us over there, and this is where we can hold. Then we come to the area that was in the news 2-3 years ago, Doklam. Doklam, very close to Doklam, is Natula. Natula is the area where our artillery and forces gave them a drubbing in 1967. And we can give them a drubbing again now. But we are unlikely to go in that area. This is my feeling. I mean, I'm not the planner. Then we come further west. Further west, we come to Demchok, which Akshayji was talking about. Now, Demchok is very interesting because the Nagari airfield, which is at 4,500 meters height, sits on the Sindhu riverbed, and it's a flat, straight riverbed going all the way to Demchok. If we put armored forces there, we will be there in a day. We will get that airfield, and the G219 is just next to that, 10 kilometers away. Choke the G219 line over there. After that, you have Aksai Chin. If I may point out a few things, yeah, I think Akshayji has said everything. There are 3 or 4 areas in Aksai Chin where they can attack and we can attack too. The northernmost area is near DBO. It's a flat plain. They've put forces there, but we can also put forces there. We come a little lower down, it's Galwan. Galwan, their roads to Galwan are very long and very bad. And they're not going to bring, well, you know, they're not going to be able to bring tanks on that riverbed. We can hold there. Going further south, they're a little strong in that area. There's a place called Hot Spring and Gogra. And finally, we come down to the area where all this Finger Four and things are going on, the Pangong and Spanger lakes. And this is an area where, as Akshayji said, we can be strong, and we can, I personally feel, as a non-military expert, perhaps a armchair general, we can probably grab some territory from them in that area.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So Akshayji, in last program, you did give a little bit of overview to our viewers about how our braveheart soldiers gave a befitting reply to Chinese, in Galwan, and little bit you talked about you in Gogra too. Maybe for the benefit of viewers who may not have seen that program, right? Can you, because Dr. Shiv brought up a program, a good point that there are areas where China can attack. So can you share with our viewers how our soldiers did reply and give confidence that if that happens again, we are far equipped or even better to give them similar reply?
Sure. So very quickly, the background to this is that from 1993 onwards, in a series of agreements, 1993, 1996, 2005, what was called the Peace and Tranquility Pact was signed, which basically meant that neither party, but basically China, would not try to change the status quo on ground in terms of where the LAC alignment is unilaterally. And to enforce that, because the perceptions of the LAC are different, both parties will patrol their areas without carrying firearms within 2 kilometers of the LAC. Mm-hmm. The Chinese, as usual, have not really followed that in spirit, though they've followed that in letter. So they've not followed it in spirit. And what they've done is they've constantly tried to come in with increasing magnitude and increasing lateral discontent over the last few years. In Galwan, what they tried to do was, as I said, because it was Xi Jinping's birthday, they tried to do a misadventure. And because our troops are not allowed to carry rifles mated with their magazines because of this thing, so they went in there carrying their rifles, but not mated with the magazines. The magazines were in the pouches, as a standard practice, in the evening. Previous to this, on the 6th of June night, the corps commanders had met, the Lieutenant General from our side and from their side had met, and they decided to disengage.
Correct. There was a disengagement that was going on, and it happened in between that.
Correct. So they actually moved back, and the troops that were managing that area from the Chinese side moved back, but they were replaced by different troops, what are called Eagle Commandos. To be very honest, I don't know who they are, but they were replaced by different troops, and they came back to the point which was called PP Patrol Point 14. CO 16 Bihar, Colonel Santosh Babu went with a party of 30 men to see what was happening and asked them to move back, and he was ambushed. So ambush basically means you're lying in wait. They were lying in wait on the heights, and they started throwing boulders on all of them. And then after that, they attacked them with these weapons that we are aware of, the clubs with barbed wire and nails around them, and so on and so forth. Now, the interesting thing is, in the armed forces, there is the concept called issue, right? So you're issued your uniform, you're issued weapons, you're also issued food and drinks and various things. These medieval weapons that people are talking about were not made by them in a short span of time. They're almost like issue weapons. They've been issued to them across the entire breadth of that area, because we've seen them in Spanga, we've seen them in Pangong Tso, we've seen it in Galwan. So the way armies work is that obviously at some central place, these things have been created, and in some numbers, I won't say every troop, you know, the 800 soldiers in the battalion, and everybody's authorized a rifle, everybody has not been given this, but say about 30 to 50 people have been issued this. Issue means you officially give them. And they attacked us with this. And what did our troops do when they saw the CO get hit? You know, CO is God, especially in infantry battalion, but I'm sure, you know, even in Air Force Scotland and everywhere, in infantry battalion, he's God. You don't touch the CO. I mean, you don't even talk, you don't even show your ankhe to them. You know, you don't do that. The troops did a dhava charge. Dhava charge is that they charge the bayonet to the rifle and dal nikal, and they just smashed them. They got in 300 more troops from them. They got in about 300 people. And the interesting thing is, from our side, reinforcements came from different units.
Yeah.
So the Ghatak platoon, so this was basically 16 Bihar, but the Ghatak platoon, which is about 30 men of 3 Punjab, which is infantry regiment, came. And the gunners came. So they were, that's very interesting. 3 medium regiment, the Khalsas, the Sardars from 3 medium regiment came. And I think from 181 or 81 field regiment also came. And they really gave them a drubbing, and they broke that dam that I told you about, or little structure that I told you about. And as I said, we have, you know, American intercepts say that about 35 Chinese have been killed. We have counted, I think, about 30 or 40 helicopter sorties. Each sortie saying you can carry 2 stretchers. That's at least 80 stretchers, probably more. So, you know, depending on where the estimate is, anywhere between 40 to 150 Chinese troops have died, and they're keeping it quiet. And we are hearing that this is creating discord there. In fact, recently the Prime Minister went to Leh, and as you saw, he met all the troops, the injured troops. And that has created a lot of fire there, because they're saying that here your Prime Minister has come and met the injured troops, here ours are not being acknowledged. Yeah. So basically that is the that is what happened.
Got it. So you made 3 interesting points. In first, that the whatever makeshift, right, the equipment they use were, you know, with barbed wires and things like that, nails on that, etc., that we saw in many news, were not just in Galwan, but they were seen in other sectors as well. So they were not something, you know, at the ground level, some commander or some, you know, decided to do it. It was actually more strategic or planned, right? So they actually, they did it planned way to go with that kind of, you know, I would call it still weapons. They are weapons.
They're
technically not
weapons,
firearm, right? So that's the one point you made. Second point you made is that, you know, in response to there, we could move so many battalions and, you know, troops. So our response was extremely agile, which is very unheard of, you know, knowing that the kind of bureaucracy that we live in. So moving within, you know, just a short notice, so many different troops from different areas, I think that's a very agile, that shows how our army has become so agile, right?
Actually, Dhirenji, no, basically these were troops on ground. So 16, there must have been, there is an infantry brigade there. So 16 Bihar and 3 Punjab are 2 constituent units of that infantry brigade. So it's got nothing to do with bureaucracy here. Basically, those troops are already there.
Okay.
What is interesting is that the RT is quite forward up. The fact that the RT troops could come so quickly means that their gun positions are very close by.
What I mean by that is that, you know, I know in the past, at least there had to be a permission taken to any movement, but here, maybe that was done very quickly.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by, you know, being agile. So it's not that we had a bureaucracy where we have to get a request and, you know, wait for a few days to get a response and all that. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. So coming to Commander Mehta, to you, Air Commander Mehta, what if, you know, we talked about the limitations that China would have given the terrain, given the airfield limitations in, you know, various sectors around Ladakh and Xinjiang. But what if China were to ally with Pakistan and deploy its assets in Pakistan and attack through that Pakistani air bases. In that scenario, how are we stacked up? Can we handle two-front war essentially?
Okay, good question. I would also say that one should never underestimate your enemy. It would be a wrong thing to do. I'm sure the Chinese are very well aware that they have limitations because of the locations of their airfields, that they are in our proximity in Tibet Plateau. So they have other assets. They have a fair number of UAVs. They've converted the MiG-19 old aeroplanes into UAVs, nearly 200 of them. They call them the J6. They have ballistic missiles, both tactical and strategic, both for conventional as well as nuclear. And not touching on the nuclear part, but conventional. A huge arsenal actually. And their tactics have been, as we understand from our reading in the past, is more focused towards ground offensive to grab land, as has been happening in the past. And their air force is also initially planned to be a kind of supporting the army. But that may not be easily possible for them at this point and this particular area where the whatever aggression or campaign or tactical battle is likely to take place. Coming to your question about participation of Pakistan in this conflict, the moment they provide their airfields to China, that means they are involved with us.
They are drawn into war, yeah.
By the convention, Geneva Convention, or any understanding, everybody will agree that the moment you provide a base to another country, you are at war. The same thing, they are also at war with us. Strategically speaking, at the moment, Pakistan is very quiet. There are reasons for it. It is undergoing its own issues at the moment. Recently, you found that there's a political crisis within Pakistan because of the PM and his ministers, whatever statements they've been making. They're having a little bit of issue with the PI grounding so many unauthorized pilots and the European Aviation Space Agency blocking them from traveling to Europe anymore. That's going to be they're going to be hit very badly. There is a problem with the hybrid military democratic kind of model that is running at the moment. That is failing to some extent. They don't have a replacement for the PI. What I'm saying is internally they are at the moment stuck with some of their own issues within the country. And if you look at what is happening between India and China from their perspective, they're happy to see India engaged with China. In the sense, you are now kind of deploying a whole lot of troops in that area. There's some kind of a strategic balancing that is happening from Pakistan's perspective when India is engaged with China, because you have to now provide so much of support, logistical support and human costs on both sides, and things of that sort. Not to forget that Pakistan has also deployed close to 20,000 troops near the Gilgit area and those part of the north of the Siachen on that side, just in case something else happens and there's an offensive support that is required. If China starts using Pakistan base, there is certainly going to be a huge test of our capabilities in terms of using our resources. Now, we have been, in principle, talking about 42 squadrons of aircraft strength that the Air Force requires to be able to engage on two different battlefronts. If you hear this very often, and Air Force continues to try and get this understood by the political and the MOD and stuff, to say that if we have 42 squadrons, I can look after China, deployment against Chinese forces on the eastern side, and at the same time look after the western borders with number of squadrons. But nobody has the luxury of having 42 squadrons, not in today's times. When you had cheaper aeroplanes of the 60s and 70s, you could buy them from Russia, you could buy hundreds of them pretty cheap, and you could fill the squadrons. So it's extremely difficult to have a technologically superior fighter kind of aeroplane now in huge numbers. It will be few. So what will happen is the leadership in the service, Chief Marshal Bhaduria and his staff and the operational vice chief and everyone is already aware of this kind of requirement. There is a certain amount of attention being given to this probability, because since the Article 370 abrogation happened, it is quite likely that in the larger interest is a strategic kind of intent. Pakistan and China could have decided to make this move to deploy forces from the east, as well as slowly Pakistan comes in from the west, and thereafter kind of do a pincer on us to grab Kashmir in the end. It is all possible. All these are likelihoods and these are probabilities that may happen. But to my mind, I don't think we need to worry too much at this point of time, because there is a global attention to this particular development that is happening in this part of the world. And with the pandemic playing a huge role in depleting people's capability in terms of safeguarding people's lives and other things, these things are bound to have a very huge impact politically. And there is bound to be a participation or support to us from US and the allies kind of from the European side as compared to what China is going to see. So in my mind, whilst we are aware, I don't see as a major threat in the immediate future about China using the Pakistani bases. Hopefully this whole thing will de-escalate shortly and we should be able to be living in peace again for a little while. That's my view.
Okay, thank you so much. Akshay, you wanted to go.
Yeah. So so Sir mentioned that 20,000 troops in Gilgit-Baltistan area. Now, interesting thing is that area is actually an offensive area for us. So basically, what they've done is they have showed up that area to stop our offensive, if it happens. So as I brought out, you need significant ratios in mountain warfare. They already have a force commander northern areas in that region, which is about 5 brigades, and they probably just moved up one more division. I just want to make one very quick point, just big picture. Go ahead, sir. I'll just make one very quick point. When you see Pakistan, assume that there is a two-front war, just assuming. As I brought out, we've got about 24 divisions. The entire Pakistani army has also got about 23, 24 divisions. Now, Pakistan is cut by the Indus River, north to south. They've got 9 corps. So these 24 divisions are congregated, are collected in the ratio of 2 or 3 divisions per corps in 9 corps. Out of those 9 corps, 7 corps are in Pakistani Punjab. 1 corps is in Karachi area, 5 corps, and then they've got 1 in the Balochistan area. Now this is very interesting. So if you look at north-south, the Indus River cuts Pakistan into north-south. Assuming they mobilize and move everything forward, even then, the point is, in Punjab, the Indus has 5 tributaries like this. Mm-hmm. So the Satluj, the Chenab is huge. Chenab, Satluj, Ravi, and all of those. Each of them have bridges. Now, all of Pakistani, about 60-70% of Pakistani army is concentrated in 7 corps in the Punjab area. When war happens, if we can take out those bridges, okay. Also take out the bridges on the Indus River, they will be hard pressed to reinforce the south from the north. So what can they do with that force? They can move them against our Punjab, but we've got enough fortifications there. We've got three whole corps, several independent armored brigades waiting for them. We can hold them there. And then we can launch a massive offensive in the south. Now this is public information. Everybody knows what things are. 21 corps and one of our other strike corps can launch a massive offensive in the south, cutting them off. So I think it'll be suicidal for them to do anything. And one last point I would make is that in this whole thing, if a 2-for-1 war starts, our Air Force brothers will have a lot of tasks. They will have to achieve air dominance and they will also have to do strike roles. Because one area we are slightly weaker than Pakistan amongst all is artillery. But also remember, we have 4,000 tanks. They have hardly 1,500. In a war with Pakistan, all of our armored formations will work against them. The entire force of our armored formations will work against them.
Got it.
So I personally believe, not being jingoistic, that a two-front war will not be lost by us. I'm quite sure of it because of these things.
Dr. Shiv wanted to make a point and then we can move to the next question.
Yeah, actually, I have 3 or 4 points to make based on what was said earlier. Mm-hmm. I do appreciate Air Commodore Mehta's point that we should not underestimate our adversary. So you see, China uses this. China knows that everybody says we must not underestimate our adversary. So what China does is to show all their strengths, to show off things that they don't have. They say they've got a stealth fighter, made it in 2 years. They say they've got this, they've got that. And they don't reveal their casualties. So now we're all supposed to think they're very strong and we're supposed to be scared. This is their idea of winning wars without fighting. So I will set that question aside. Two, three other small points I want to make. I will try and be brief. The access roads in Aksai Chin are also not good. They are very long. If you look at where they are at all these points, whether it is the Depsang Plain or Gogra, in all these places, the roads to reach the highway, not the main towns, to reach the highway, it's 120 to 150 kilometers. Many of these highways, even where they have built good roads, go across riverbeds and they go across permafrost. Now, permafrost is 5,500 meters above sea level. So these drivers are driving up the highway. The highway is already at 4,500, 5,000. Then they go another 150 kilometers across permafrost. Now, what does permafrost mean? What does 5,000 mean? People have to be acclimatized. Now, a couple of brief points about the People's Liberation Army. I don't want to underestimate the enemy. I was reading an article today, a 27 article about conscripts in the Chinese army. Literally, they have conscriptions of 20% of the army every year. That means 20% of the army is rotated every year. And there's another little tidbit. You see, our soldiers are all acclimatized to high altitude. Now, what does acclimatization mean? You have to live in high altitude. You have to go up slowly, live there for some time. Your body gets adjusted to acclimatization. Now, if you look at reports, the Chinese are providing oxygen enrichment to their troops. Fine, this sounds good, but this is for sleeping at night. Engineering workers in the Andes in South America get oxygen enrichment because they work at high altitude, they come back at night, and they sleep at an oxygen altitude which is lower. That means although they are at 4,500, 5,000 meters, when they come to their rooms, the oxygen available is like 3,000 meters. This is what the Chinese soldiers are getting. What sort of acclimatization are they going to get? I'm not at all surprised if our men have finished off 100 of them at Galwan. I don't want to underestimate the enemy, but I'm not too sure how many of these single son mothers of the Chinese army are going to get their sons back. Thank you.
So, Dr. Shiv, what you are making a point is that, first of all, China plays this mind game through the information war and tries to project itself as far more powerful than what it is. So it may be the dog, not the tiger, as it kind of, projects itself to be. And also they are not as battle hardened, at least in the high terrain, like
they
our
are not
armies.
battle hardened at all. Battle hardening is over. Those days are over. They are not fighting any battles. I mean, apart from Galwan, before Galwan, in the last 5 years, how many troops has China lost in combat?
Go ahead.
I completely endorse Dr. Shiv's view. In fact, last time I talked about the three warfares. Those three warfares are psychological, information, and legal. Legal warfare is that, listen, in Galwan, what they did was they carried out this letter of the law. They didn't use firearms, but they broke the spirit. What we are trying to bring out is that on the kinetic side, we have an edge, and they don't want to get kinetic for the reasons brought out by Dr. Shiv. Therefore, they do try to put this thing out in the media that we are too strong, don't fight with us. If you're very so this is their strategy. The three warfares. Just want to say that.
Got it. Air Commodore Mehta, you talked about our squadron, or we need more fighter aircraft, etc. But recently, just a couple of days back, India made agreement to purchase more aircraft from Russia, and MiGs, and before that, and upgrades also some, and before that, of course, Rafale. So we are upgrading and enhancing. And is it also two front, right? First, of course, it is strengthening, but also it is bringing allies like Russia to our fold. and obviously other Western allies are in our fold. Would that also help in two-front war that you talked about?
Yes, certainly. When the chips are down and we really need some help, the Russians have always supported. Quite a few of us who are in the know of what happened during Kargil will know that, and they will support this statement. Today, US is also very much supportive of Indian stand, its political ambitions in terms of being able to help the world globally in terms of you've seen what we've done in the pandemic. So India is not a country which has been trying to, show its strength by grabbing other smaller neighbors and stuff like that. We have a very noble kind of projection in terms of our aims in life. In terms of if we were to get into the two-front war, as Akshay also highlighted, it's going to be a huge challenge. The army certainly is well positioned to be able to tackle the Pakistani ground forces. Air Force it will be a challenge to manage both sides. But nevertheless, we have the tactics. We have a certain amount of knowledge about how it can be done, and it has been there in our plans all lifelong since we've seen the Air Force, because we always thought of having the capability of engaging both sides. So it's not something new. How to manage it is something which our leadership is quite capable of taking. No issues.
Okay. Coming to the last question, Akshayji, now we talked about Army, we talked about Air Force, but what about naval and how are we? Because, while China has, so much of naval capability, and we talked about, with Pakistan, but maybe we can attack Pakistan through naval as well and, kind of divert their attention. So can you just briefly talk about naval capability and how does it come in that kind of warfare?
So, what the most interesting thing is that in terms of the quantitative difference between us and China, the greatest gap is in Navy. They've got a significant, especially in submarine force. But in terms of the capability, it is exactly the other way around, and everybody in the world accepts it. So this is the interesting part. If you speak to whoever in the strategic community, everybody says that, listen, China is trying to hold you in the mountains because they want to get your attention away from the seas, so that give them another 10 years so that they can build up. And so why is this the case? Why is it that our numbers are much lesser than them as far as the Navy is concerned, but our capability is significantly higher? Again, Bhagwan has been very kind to us, geography, right? The Indian peninsula juts into the Indian Ocean, and then from the Chinese side, they are way up. And just to come from their seaports into, say, the Bay of Bengal and all, is about 4,000 nautical miles. That is, depending on which ship you're going, it's about 2-week sailing. And you come to the four straits, Malacca Straits and all of that, which can be choked off. So the main point here is, and plus the Chinese, if you say that their army is not battle hardened and all, their navy has never been in war, ever. I mean, in their history. And their navy has exercised with others and things are not very good for them. So what will they do with us? They've got 70 submarines. Out of these 70 submarines, about 15 are SSNs, which is basically nuclear attack submarines. And they will certainly try to use them. Our counter against these is our P8Is, which is with the Navy. We've got 8 of them. 4 are already in Seattle, ready to come. Basically, crews are not available, but crews can be gotten quite fast. So we've got about 12 of these submarine hunters. There is something called a SOSUS line, SOSUS. It's basically a string of sensors underwater which connect thousands of miles under the sea, and then they can track submarines coming. And then they will give this information to a network area. The network area will see which assets are close by to prosecute that threat. So we will prosecute those threats. The interesting thing is, as Air Commodore Mehta brought out, that other countries will help us. This is the way they can help us through intelligence and all. Japan has already passed a law recently that their sources of information can be shared with us.
Yes.
So the main thing as far as the Navy is concerned is the following. I don't think they will come out of the South China Sea. It's extremely dangerous for them. If they come out of the South China Sea, we can interdict them in several areas. One is the Four Straits area, and the other is they'll be in home waters. They will be in our home waters. So we will have what is called internal lines of communication. They will have very long external lines of communication. We can hammer them. They will certainly not come out with their carrier battle groups because they have no experience in using them. They have no experience, and if they come, they'll be setting targets for us. I'll defer to Dr. Shiv here.
If I may make a couple of points.
Yes,
One
please.
thing is, other than the Indian Air Force, no other Air Force in the world has experience of attacking high altitude targets. All targets in Ladakh are at 4,500 meters or higher. So Indian Air Force had a bit of a problem in 1999, but they did very well. And as far as China is concerned, apart from all the other problems, I really have no idea what their Air Force is going to do up attacking targets at that altitude. More likely they'll try land attack missiles. That's point number one. Point number two is, as Akshayji said, they have to come a long way down. Malacca Strait is right very close to the Andamans where we can see them, but
Correct.
they can't all come through. Do you know that all Chinese submarines cannot come through Malacca Strait if they want to sail underwater? If they want to sail on the surface, everybody will know they are coming. They have to go all the way around another 2,000. They have to go to a place called Lombok Strait and another couple of other straits far away.
Is it because of the depth there, or what is the issue?
It's not deep enough. It's only
Okay.
20 meters. So 20 meters is not deep enough for a submarine to go underneath. I think their aircraft carrier can come to the 20 or 25 meters, but nothing else. Submarines definitely cannot come. They have to go all the way around. And if they're
Got it.
conventional submarines, they're going to need, food and fuel. They're not going to get it very close by.
Okay.
It has to be nuclear. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. So I think we'll
Just one very quick point. Just a minute. See, the point is, as Doc brought out, nuclear submarines can stay underwater for a long period of time, but even then they need food and all that, right? So they will still need sustenance for the human element, if not for surfacing to charge their engines, and it's going to take them 2 weeks to just come into theater, unless they forward deploy and the war starts after they're forward deployed and all of that. They'll take 2 weeks to come into theater, 2 weeks to go back. So this creates a big problem for them. And where will they supply? Humbert-Tota in Sri Lanka is not ready. And if war happens, we will destroy it. Pakistan will be shut down. So we are in fairly good state as far as the Navy is concerned. And my naval friends tell me that. They don't give me more details on that, but they're extremely confident. And when I counter them and say, listen, they've got 70 submarines, we've got only 16. And they said, we'll take care. So they're very, very confident.
And I think we are right now kind of, enhancing our strength in Andaman. As recent as, 3 days back, that, news came. Quad agreement that we have between US, Australia, Japan, and India is specifically focused on South China Sea. So I think there will be some leverage that we will have, if not, they using their fighting against China, at least they can use, they can help block in many ways.
Absolutely. The most important thing our allies can do for us is, or whatever, hold them there, tie up their navy, just keep your 3 carrier battle groups in the South China Sea. They won't use the navy, they'll just use them there, and probably they'll keep a significant part of the Air Force there. So if they can do that, then the Indian Air Force can handle a 2-front war, no problem. All we need to do is ensure that a part of them doesn't come into theater. We don't want people to fight with them. Just keep them busy so the part of them doesn't come into theater, and then we can handle them. No problem.
Got it. Thanks. I think this was really enriching. I learned a lot from this program. Thank you, everyone. And one last disclaimer before we go ahead, that all the information that our participants have shared today is everything that is available in public domain, and it's something they're personal. And it's nothing associated with their professional, attachment that they might have today. So they are sharing on their personal capacity, information available in public domain. They may be privy to some information that's not in public domain, that's not shared in this platform. That was the pre-agreement that we had before coming into this program. So I just wanted to leave that disclaimer for everybody who's watching this. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Jai Hind.